Hello, friends. Welcome back to the Caderna podcast. I'm your host, Brian Caderna. In today's episode, I had the privilege to interview a true icon of the business world. Frank O'Connell grew up working on a farm in upstate New York. He lost his father at a very young age and was raised by his mom, who he credits for his work ethic and entrepreneurial zeal. After graduating from Cornell University, Frank went on to lead a 50-year career to the highest heights of business. He served as president and CEO of companies like Reebok, HBO, Indian Motorcycle, Skybox International, Gibson Greetings, and more. Frank has a new book out titled Jump First, Think Fast, An Unconventional Approach to High Performance. I think that's a great mentality on life, by the way. In this episode, we cover everything from knowing thy customer, how to maximize your career potential through networking, strategic planning as a CEO, and work-life balance from someone who's moved over 20 times in their career. So without further ado, hang on tight for my interview with Frank O'Connell.
Is going to require work and time and sweat and toil.
If money wasn't an issue, what would I be doing?
Don't worry about it. You'll figure it out.
Change is the only constant.
The Caderna Podcast.
Frank, I know that was quite a resume that I went through in our intro there, and I feel like I barely even scratched the surface. So I got to start. Did you have a particular moment in your career, perhaps, that you'd say was most exciting?
Wow. Well, I've got to say, probably one of the most dramatic was with Reebok and the whole establishment of the pump and doing all the, the crazy bungee jumping commercials, etc. Definitely was, a highlight.
And now, Reebok pump, is that those old shoes you had as kids where you're actually like pumping the tongue of the shoe to fill up the rest of the sneaker?
Yeah, absolutely. And, we were going right up against Nike when I went and became the president of Reebok brands. They were losing share, to Nike, and they really had nothing in the whole pipeline. So we really needed desperately to quickly develop a product that whole industry runs on technology. So we were able, with the help of an outside firm, to develop really the pump shoe. But then, of course, the question was, you got to have advertising that's as dramatic as the product. And that led us to the bungee jump commercial, which I don't, is pretty exciting, but I'll just give you 2 seconds on that.
Sure.
Basically, I knew we'd never win on the court against, Nike if we put the Reebok shoe, the pump up against them on the court. So I said, let's find a new field where we can win. We'll create one. So bungee jumping. So, there was this bridge in Seattle, Washington. We had 2 jumpers, one wearing Nike shoes and one wearing the Reebok pumps. And when, of course, they came back up, the Nike shoes were empty and the Reebok jumper came back up. It created huge controversy, which is exactly what we needed. One of the networks said, we're not going to run this. My PR firm said, every mother in the country is going to call you, Frank. And I said, great. But anyways, it created $1 billion business in 1 year. So.
Wow, that's incredible. And was this around the time where Nike had signed on Jordan? I know that was obviously a game changer.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it did change the game, and we were really up. We were really up against Jordan, and it took something pretty dramatic. So.
Yep. While we're on that, I mean, what happened to the Reebok pump? Because I remember there was a whole craze about that. Kids loved, pumping up their shoe. I think there were even commercials where they'd like keep pumping and it exploded, all over them. There were so many, funny little commercials and things on that. You don't see that anymore. Was that just kind of a technology that went, by the wayside?
Well, it continued on for a couple of years, and then I also introduced a couple of other new technologies. But I use that in the book as an example What happened after that really was, Reebok continued to drift, etc. And it's kind of me, it's an expression of not finding the DNA in your brand, not really getting a positioning that's unique and sustainable. So I use that as an example, in my book of, and now what happened? Well, he ended up, of course, selling the company for a lot of money to Adidas. And then Adidas, just sold it again now, but at a very low, return on investment. So interesting example of not being able to get a sustainable, growth.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember back in the day, not to belabor the point, but I was a huge Cowboys fan. Emmitt Smith was like my guy. And I know that he did a lot of advertising with Reebok. I wanted to have Reeboks because of Emmitt Smith.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. We had a lot of, during that time, we had a lot of great athletes. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I bet. Yeah. Marketing is key. And so if we could just kind of take a step back to clue in some of our listeners here. I mean, you've had such a journey that you grew up on a farm, correct? Before you went on to all of this, business success.
Yeah. I grew up on a farm in upstate New York, and my mother was a city girl. My father was a farmer, even though he went to Notre Dame. But he died when I was 2.5. And I had a brother who was a year older. And my mother decided to stay on the farm, which was quite incredible. And she was a wonderful woman. But that's where we started our whole entrepreneurial drive. I mean, we had 300 laying hens, 3,000 broiler hens. We had all sorts of things. And we really ran from very young age, a farming operation, which taught us a lot about, risk taking. So on my book, jump first, think fast. I mean, I kind of grew up doing that, at a very young age on the farm.
Yeah, I know. And I could imagine that would teach you a lot of the entrepreneurial spirit. And so how did you transition, that kind of skill set of hard work, obviously at a very young age, to now going to work in corporate America? Is that something that happened through college, or, when did you say I'm ready to kind of leave this realm and enter kind of the big leagues, if you will?
Well, the fortunate thing was I was able to get into Cornell. And at that point, it was, if you were a resident of New York State, it was tuition free. So I actually went to the College of Agriculture at Cornell. Totally changed my life. I had some superb mentors. And I gained great self-confidence, but I also started to find out that I was pretty creative and saw the world differently than other people. And so that started to really, propel me into a whole different area. I started to think much larger. And then, of course, when I double registered and I got an MBA, and I was 17 years old. And I had one child when I went to Cornell, which was pretty different. I'll tell you that also that really gives you a lot of incentive. So, and my mother always had a saying. My mother said, the harder I work, the luckier I get. And so one of the things I learned quickly was I could probably, beat out anybody who probably was more intelligent than I was by just, working harder. And that stayed with me through my whole career. And it gave me great self-confidence.
And so did you kind of have that sense of self-awareness right when you got to Cornell, that you were willing to kind of outwork your classmates? Like, was that that ultimately gave you kind of that differentiator of, hey, I'm gonna pass these guys?
Yeah, if I look at my test scores when I went in, I think I probably had some of the lowest test scores of anybody who was admitted to Cornell. But I went to the top of I was fourth in the class. So, I ended up graduating fourth in the class, and then in that as well in business school. So I very quickly learned that was the key, and I was willing to do things other people wouldn't do. So as I mentioned, I think in my book you'll see my first one of the summers between going to graduate school, I actually worked for Jewel Tea in Chicago, and I drove one of those Jewel Tea trucks, and I sold 200 staple grocery items to customers. And I learned a lot about life and a lot about dealing directly with the consumer during that time. So, yeah.
Gotcha. No, that's really interesting. So you went to Cornell for originally agriculture management, then you get your MBA. And then what was the first break? I mean, because I'm sure a lot of listeners are hearing just your bio saying he had to know somebody, or how do you start at the tippity top of these monster companies? I guess it doesn't happen overnight. Like, how did that come about?
Yeah. Well, at Carnation, I was very fortunate. They had a phenomenal training program, and they had for a select number of MBAs an accelerated training program. So I worked in every aspect of the business very early on.
Where was this?
This is their headquarters is in Los Angeles.
I'm sorry. What was the company though? That first company?
Carnation Company.
Carnation Company. Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah. It was a big dairy operation in Seattle. It then had then started a very successful consumer product company. And, actually I was lucky that in my first job, I became the product manager on Carnation Instant Breakfast. So that became also my love of product development, but also being on the edge of breakthroughs. In Carnation Instant Breakfast, it was a huge breakthrough going through, Post and Kellogg and getting into the middle of the cereal section. And I knew that I started to see that I had a real feel for, developing product. And that really propelled me, then I became head of the instant products division for all the, product development. And it wasn't so much, knowing people as the experiences, that I encountered. And also at that young age, one of the ways I learned to get above everybody else was I would wait, speak last, and then I normally would try to come up with an idea that was way above tactical, that was far more strategic, and everybody would stop and listen to that. So,
what do you mean by that? That, like, can you just tell us kind of way above tactical, far more strategic? Like, what does that imply? What's an example of that?
Okay. So, the questions would be things like, well, should we really be in this business? Or what business are we really in, as an example, and I can give you some examples of when we were in the trading card business. I started to ask that question: what are we really in? We did a piece of research and said we weren't in selling athletic trading cards, etc. What we were doing, we were connecting kids and their heroes, and that took us to whole new set of fan bases of television, movies, comics, etc., in addition to just, the NBA, the NFL, etc. And that exploded, the business. So just an example of not just saying, being tactical, get above it, think very strategically.
We kind of see the big picture, see other opportunities that other people aren't thinking of. And
yes,
when you were having those conversations, when you decided to kind of speak last at a board meeting or something at Carnation, how old were you at this time?
I was about 23. Yeah, I was about 23. So,
wow.
Yeah.
And so the other people sitting at the table, I imagine they're probably much older than you were.
Yes. Oh, definitely. Yes. But now I'll have to tell you another story about Carnation, which is lessons learned. So early on, I had a chance to make a presentation to Everett Olson, who was the president of Carnation Company. And my boss was great. My boss had great risks with me. So I went in to make this presentation. And I started into the presentation. part of which I had on paper. And all of a sudden, he wadded up my paper and threw it at me and said, "Come back when you get the numbers right." I had a wrong number in my presentation. I never forgot that. I never had a wrong number in my presentation after that. But that's, lessons learned and learned from mistakes. So,
Yeah, that attention to detail. And so as you were starting to kind of make your way up the ranks, at the age of 23, what do you think it was in that board meeting, with the higher ups? I guess you said you were the head of product development eventually. Was
right.
do you think it's more important that you came up with the idea, the product idea? Was it selling the idea to the people in the room? Was it a little bit of luck of being in the right time and place? Like, what was maybe that key thing that separates you from the pack?
Yeah.
I guess really it would come down to, is it the idea, kind of like the invention, or is it getting people to embrace your idea?
Yeah. Well, it's kind of both. Now, one is I learned pretty early on that I was creative, but I also recognized great ideas from other people around me who had developed them. And then you're quite correct. The next thing is your ability to really persuade people and really be able to sell the idea and really make it real, and get support, from the organization to go forward with one of those ideas. So, I did learn early on that I had a skill that when I would speak, even at a young age in those meetings, I could tell when I had them, the room went very quiet, and everybody was listening. And, part of that later on, when I was raising hundreds of millions of dollars for my projects, a lot of it is people back people, not just ideas, and not just look at them as investments. So, your ability to be passionate about something is absolutely critical in the selling process.
Yeah, you have to believe in it. And so you've had such a diverse array of jobs here. Did you ever, like when you were either there at Carnation in your 20s or whatever came next on your journey, did you find somewhere that you said, I love this, I want to build this, this is where I'm going to be forever? Or did you enjoy constantly having something new that you could go and attack?
No, I continually enjoyed change. And so, actually you go in and you learn one business. So, at Carnation, you learn all the instant products division and how to, develop products and whatever. But then I said, okay, now I'm looking for, what are other areas that are going to be interesting to me? And also a lot of what I was doing at that time was saying, okay, how is this going to help me personally develop, to be exposed to other businesses, organizations, tools, etc. So, and at that time, you'd be considered a job hopper. It's very different today, moving from company to company. So,
and that's something I even have conversations with my clients about as we're going through financial planning of where they want to be career wise. And, a lot of folks now, they kind of have this idea that to find your true worth, you have to be willing to hop around. To climb the ladder, you have to be willing to kind of continually take jumps and really focus on yourself, which I know some employers out there probably are not a fan of that. They'd rather have kind of the company man. What do you think, like in today's day and age, if you were talking to a young professional, should they be doing that, or should they be trying to just climb the ladder within that company?
Well, first, I was a big believer, and I will tell you, when I was running companies, why my passion was mentoring, and it still is today. So, if you looked at LinkedIn now, you see all these people who are coming back and saying, God, you changed my life, whatever. So I believe that your first loyalty has got to be to your career and your personal development. And when an employee walks into my office, I start with them. So in their development, and then how do they fit how do they fit into the company? But today, and so I've got a toy company where I'm constantly hiring. Okay. We've got a very successful toy company and we're hiring. But what now the changes, we're definitely after skills and new skills, and people who are flexible and adaptable. So, from an employer standpoint, we no longer figure, I think, that people are going to be with us a long time. The question is, do they have a valuable skill base, that we can use that's going to be productive for some period of time? So, the main thing, and you'll see what taking risks, jump first, think fast, is don't get stuck. So a lot of people that I mentor, are someplace stuck. They're not in the right company, or they're not in, the right career path, for them, or they're afraid to take that next big leap because of the fear of failure. And I mean, all of that, you really have to overcome if you want to grow personally and also grow a company. You can't sit still. And growth in all forms is risk-taking.
And just to stick right there, and I think that feeds in perfectly with the title of your book, which I love, Jump First, Think Fast. I mean, that does say go out there and take a risk and then think fast, essentially. So as somebody's growing in their career, like, how do you help coach them on when it's the right time to take a risk? What is a good risk to take? As opposed to just saying, hey, this sounds like a good idea, and kind of, burning the ships, if you will, and then unfortunately maybe not ending up in the best situation.
Yeah. If you're not moving forward and you're stagnant in your job, and also, most companies now, we're very keen on performance reviews. So you should really pick it up in your performance reviews after you've had 2 or 3 and you haven't been promoted or got to the next level. So there are definitely signals if you're really not making progress, in your current situation. So, you want to utilize that. The second thing is, are you happy? Are you passionate about what you're doing? And that's a big one for me. If you're not happy, and really enjoying what you're doing, then you've really got to move. But what I encourage people to do, don't jump. My first thing is, when I sat down with them, I said, know thyself. Analyze. Have you really analyzed who you are? What's different about you? And I make people come back to me and say, you've got to describe me in one paragraph, and probably to a potential employer, what is unique about you? Because what I found is a lot of people coming out of college kind of follow the herd. They're either kind of chasing money, the same investment banking careers, instead of really stopping and seeing who they are and taking a good assessment. And I also encourage them. I send people, and I even have put people in my organization through an assessment process with an independent assessor to figure out what really are your strengths and your weaknesses. Then you can start to put together your growth path. But most people just jump to a job or start looking. And I said, jump towards a self-analysis first.
Mm-hmm. And kind of in that same vein, I think that a theme right now, especially amongst millennials, is people want to pursue their passion. They want to approach their career with a lot of the insights that you're sharing right now. But I think the gripe that a lot of people might have is that they're almost kind of looking past that phase of, well, I have to pay my dues. And that this is kind of the other side of the argument, that, they're just looking at a passion, having fun, being fulfilled, but maybe not the long hours or the kind of the grunt work or those things. Can you speak to that at all, or where there's a place for that? Because as incredible as your journey has been, I assume there were jobs that you had that were not the best jobs, that every job won't be the best job.
Yeah, there definitely is putting in your time and effort, particularly, doing grunt things and learning, etc. It's interesting. And I've hired, I don't know, maybe hundreds or thousands of millennials. It is very interesting. I have a very different attitude, and I have two millennial sons. So, and I keep hearing this. I just encountered few of them, not many of them who work for me, have not been willing to really work hard, put in the hours. Now, they've got, from an employer standpoint, you've got to see that they are personally developing, at the same time. But I have one son who's putting too much time in the grunt work, and I'm saying, hey, time now for you to move beyond that. He's been really willing to put in his time, So, it's kind of interesting to some degree. I just don't share as much this kind of common classical attitude about millennials work. And I don't know, in the companies I'm involved in, we just have thousands of them, and we're looking for, analytical, they've got the analytical tools and, et cetera. So
you said that, at least that your attitude is different than millennials. Like, how so? What's the gap there?
Well, I think the gap is where they say they're lazy, that they're only playing for themselves, and they don't understand team play and collaboration, etc. I'm just saying that is not my experience. That gap is, and I try to understand when other people say that. Are they talking about in their companies? Can they give specific experiences with millennials where they're seeing that gap? So I'd be, it surprised me. And quite frankly, we're in such a performance-oriented environment and with performance reviews and everything else, you can't afford to have someone, in your company or on one of your teams who's really not working and performing and delivering. So you can't, you just don't last long. So
yeah. No, and I'm happy to hear you say that that stigma surrounding millennials, which I am a millennial, of being a little bit lazy or just kind of trying to find their own passion, not willing to put in the hard work for the team, that's not all true, that you've had a different experience. So that's great to hear. And I think one of the follow-up questions that I would have to that is, we're in this tight labor market. You said that, you have performance reviews. You're just not going to last if you can't get on board with hard work. But it seems like right now the employee has all the leverage, at least for the time being, that if they say, well, I want to work remote, or I want to make my own hours, I want to flex schedule, I don't want to do this, I'm going to go find a new job at a new place. Like, it seems like they have more leverage than the employer. Do you think that that's going to change? Is that kind of a fad? Is that a circumstance of the time? What do you think about that, the relationship of worker to employer today?
Yeah, that's probably it's probably a tough one to really predict. I would say this: there is not a better time to be looking for a job or to be, a millennial with a set of skills, because there are just an incredible, number of opportunities. But I'll say at the same time, when my two millennials were leaving college, the job market was very tough, and I spent a lot of time counseling them on the whole process of finding a job. When I got out of school, there were so few MBAs, everybody wanted MBAs. So I actually started in an environment where there was a high demand for, MBAs, as an example, So I think you will see companies adjust a lot. I know in our toy company, we're adjusting a lot because I need creative talent. I need toy designers. A lot. And my company is near Boston. most of those designers are on the West Coast or in other parts of the country. So, I mean, we have become, I think, very good at being the whole remote process actually has worked incredibly well for us. So we have adjusted a lot as a company, and we have adjusted a lot, with work-life balance.
Yeah, no, that's a great insight. And to piggyback on that, so I got to ask you what you think about college, because you mentioned at the forefront of that statement that when you graduated, you had an MBA, and immediately there were so few MBAs, it really separated you from the pack. Nowadays, everybody says the college diploma is the high school diploma, that you go, you get an undergrad degree, good for you. You're kind of like everybody else now. So if you can't, and there's a lot on college right now with the student loan debt crisis and stuff.
Oh yeah.
What are your thoughts on college in general, if you could summarize? And when you're hiring, as you do so often, does that matter to you if somebody has the degree or they don't?
Yeah, and there's so many sides of that I can talk from, and I will, and I'm going to try to come at it in various ways. First is, I think a young person needs to look at college and say, what is that going to do for my personal development? Forget for the moment a job. What is that going to do in terms of expanding my world? So for me, for a farm boy who goes to Cornell, and suddenly I'm exposed to all sorts of lifestyles, careers, people from all over the world and different thoughts and ideas. I mean, that to me was of incredible value in terms of widening my lens. And I think part of that is also, is that going to somehow end up making you a happier person? I'd say the answer to that is yes. And particularly, I am very keen on, when I look at, like when I'm recruiting or looking at somebody coming into Cornell, part of what I'm after is, will this person contribute to the growth of other students? So first, I just take the personal, I just say personal growth. It's extremely important for personal growth. Beyond that, I think beyond that it's important, again, to do at that age an assessment of who you are and what your skills are. And part of it is what's going to make you happy. I happen to be involved with my grandson, who just came in here, who is 23 years old, who basically kind of flunked out of college, and he was taking, all robotics courses and everything else. So he came to Woodstock with a bag of parts, and I said, "What are those, Logan?" "It's all 3D printer components." He set up a lab of 3D printers, bought all the stuff off the internet, has developed this unbelievable business, and that has gone on and on and on into other things. He's brilliant. He's kind of a perfect example of where, probably someone who college wasn't going to really help, and he is very successful and very happy with what he's doing. So, I think a lot of it is who you are, and what your skills are and what's kind of going to make you happy. So I'm not just an advocate that says everybody should go to college. Also, you can earn a phenomenal living now with a trade, in very sophisticated trades. I mean, he's building a computer-driven machine here for building furniture and bending metal, that just astounds everybody, You love this. He's built a massive tap handle business for, beer tap handles. He's now supplying all the big breweries, and because he used to produce it in China, he's got all these 3D printers working 24 hours a day. But anyways, it's just an example. So,
yeah. No, and I think there's, many great stories like that when you think of the Mark Zuckerbergs and Bill Gates, Steve Jobs of the world, where it's almost like at a certain point, they're like, I think I'm outgrowing college. And they do take that jump just to kind of dive into the world.
Yeah. There's one other piece that I think, just back on the educational system,
Sure.
Where I think, it's out of whack. I used to look at, because I've been on all the councils of Cornell for years, etc. And at the same time running these businesses, and I just saw where the college was behind the power curve. Okay. I'll give you one, not teaching what was highly relevant. I'll give you one example. I've done turnarounds, and turnarounds are probably the most complex, etc. One of the biggest issues, you can figure out the strategy in a turnaround much faster than you can change the culture. Nobody was talking about culture or culture change, at Cornell when I was there, in all the courses that I took. So that's one piece where it was lagging. Now, I think, we should change our system. You need to really go back to some form of education about every 10 years, or you're really obsolete. So
yeah, it's true. It's kind of like, are we teaching something that isn't even going to be viable when the kid graduates? And so I want to go back a little bit to your career. I mean, you started out, like we said, at Carnation, you get to head of product development, but then you go from, baked goods to sporting apparel at Reebok to video games to HBO. It just seems kind of almost all over the place. How did you adapt your skill set so that you were relevant, not only relevant, but leading the way in each one of these industries?
Yeah, including Indian motorcycle. But what I found was the common denominator in all of that was the consumer and understanding the consumer. So, early on, first I learned I had an intuitive sense of that, but also I learned an incredible constant set of toolboxes of trying to, and I said, what is your job in marketing? It's to predict consumer behavior. And, I learned so many toolboxes about how to do that. So every time I went into a new company or industry, one of the things I learned was I started from the bottom up. I said, I'm going to take 4 weeks. I'm not going to sit in the CEO chair. I'm going to go right to the customers. And the baking business said, I'm going to ride the routes at 4:30 in the morning, and all the other business, I'm going to go to the retail stores. I want to talk to the customers. I want to get a grassroots understanding of, who my consumer is and who is my customer. And then the product. And I'm saying, you've got to use the product, use all the competitors' products. So I forced everybody at Reebok to wear all the competitors' products to better, understand them, including myself. So it was understanding your consumer, your customer, your product, and then I would start to do the biggest thing, which was a strategic plan. I took all of those companies, and I'm still taking them through a strategic plan where you basically, you lay out the path for your future, and you get everybody aligned, and you realign the organization and human capital and the financial capital behind the strategic plan, and that unites you and, gets you moving in a solid direction.
Do you think that was unique, that type of observation of trying to get consumer behavior? Because I know that is so important to kind of stay ahead of the curve. I know there's the great stories of like Warren Buffett before investing in American Express, going in the department store, seeing if people are using credit cards, if they're comfortable with that new technology. So it seems like it's such the right thing to do, what you did of traveling the routes with the baker and getting to know that customer. Do you find a lot of CEOs just ignore that they get stuck kind of in their own bubble?
Yeah, I think definitely. I think a lot of them come in at a high level. And what they do is have all these meetings with all the people that report to them. Mm-hmm. And you don't form your own view of the business you're in, and what is the product and the end benefit that you really are, you really are providing. So I think it's very common not to be able to do that. I used to make my people each quarter, each executive had to go into 30 stores, fill out a form, and then come back and report what they saw happening at retail in our product category. I'll give you another one that always, I've done a lot of work in China and India with a lot of products, et cetera, and I spent a lot of time there. It's amazing to me. I will talk to executives whose products are produced in those countries or whatever and said, have you ever been there and spent time there? I mean, have you been in your factories and on the floors and where your people are living and eating and sleeping, et cetera, like in Reebok, where we had all of it. We employed 50,000 people a day in Busan, Korea. And I went and spent tons of time there in the factories and the plant. Do you understand those cultures that are so important to us in your products as an example? So I give that just, as an example of our really executives really going and spending time. I'll tell you, most people go to India. When they land, within 3 seconds, they decide whether they want to turn around, go home or not, because everything is in the street, and they just can't deal with the culture. It's interesting. So they go to the high-end hotels, that's not where, that's not where it is. So, I think a lot of executives don't go, they go up, they don't go down. So.
Yeah, it seems like from what you're saying, they don't get their hands dirty and kind of find the inner workings of things. Very interesting. And so now when you've led at the helm, as president or CEO of these gigantic companies, was it always a circumstance of like they came to you like, hey, Frank is the guy we need at this time? Or did you look at HBO or Indian Motorcycle and say, I want to change that company. I can make things better over there? Like, how did some of those transitions come about?
Generally, people come to you. And, the big thing is executive recruiters, like in many of the companies I'm involved with, we had executive recruiters because we had very specific positions and people that we were looking for. Tell you what happened in a lot of my cases, it was all relationships. So the way I got to Mattel is I had worked for an senior executive at Hunt Wesson, and he went to Mattel to start an electronics division. And he brought me in. In the case of Reebok, the president of 20th Century Fox Film Corporation, who was my principal backer in Fox Video Games, went to Reebok to handle acquisitions and said, hey, look, you need, and he went to the board and said, you really need someone to be running this operation with a marketing and professional skill basis. So a lot of it really did come to me. There might have been some, Indian, of course, was a different one. It was a passion, and that's something that I really, wanted to do. So.
And so do you find like with a lot of these companies that it is a result of networking as opposed to somebody that worked at HBO, as whatever a bottom rung job might be, and then they grew through the farm system all the way to the top of that company? Or do you see that at that kind of upper echelon, it's more of kind of a shifting of the world's best executives?
Yeah, it's definitely both. But I mean, that's why I would encourage, relationships are so important. So building throughout your career, a network of relationships, you will find you'll be very happy doing it. That's what Harvard said, relationships. But the second thing is they will become invaluable to you, both as mentors, and in terms of opening up doors, for positions. Now, you do get in a situation where if you're at CEO levels or whatever, they're hiring executive recruiters. But I started building the relationship with executive recruiters in my first job, to get known by Heidrick and Struggle and various other people. So you got into their databases, and that's the reality of it, getting into their databases. So when job search came up, they knew something about me and, would find me. So that's, so it's really is it's both, but relationships and networks. Incidentally, I always tell college kids, start with your relationship of your peers and in your college is important. My administrative assistant, almost all of my companies, if I was trying to reach somebody at a high level or inside a company, first thing she would do would be to take a look at the board. Is there any Cornell grads on the board? Look at the management team, any Cornell grads there. And because I knew they were highly supportive of each other, and that was a great access road for me. So networking is just, the most powerful.
And just to elaborate on that point, if you could share a couple tips or just maybe processes of maintaining and building those relationships. And the reason I ask is I am a huge believer in networking. I believe with you, but it just seems hard as life goes on. You take me, for instance, I have, upwards of 1,000 personal financial planning clients. I have awesome guests that I've loved on the podcast, other industry professionals that I've grown with and worked with, alumni from the different schools I've been to. And it's like, as life goes on and it gets more complex, I know that it's important to maintain all of these relationships, but where is all of the time? And then when can you just go home and flip on the TV and just kind of decompress for a moment? How do you do that? Especially you, as you've gone through these different companies over decades. Is it, hey, make a phone call a day to an old colleague, or did you have any kind of system to that?
To be honest, not really, but without question, now all of the whole area of the social media area, helps absolutely a great deal to maintain those relationships. And it's only one most productive for me has been LinkedIn for lots of reasons. One, to maintain my relationships with people. But the second thing is I use it immensely to source people, to source acquisitions often, because I can go in and I can punch in the toy industry, and all of the people that I knew in the toy industry are there, and all of the companies, as an example. So that has been a great vehicle. But I am a firm believer, in particular, I'm constantly telling young people, I'd said, not just emails, whatever is, talk to people, and make phone calls, get into social and be in social settings where it's very valuable to belong to an industry group if you're in a particular industry, because a lot of job leads and information will come to that. And I always say to people, you belong to a lot of families. It may be your church, it may be your community. I mean, there are a lot of families. And then, of course, you've got to decide somehow you have to prioritize it. And that's always the difficult. That's always the difficult one. So, but I don't have any real. It's exhausting. I have to say it's exhausting. So.
Yeah, I imagine it would be, and that's it leads me to another point. You said that you got kind of down and dirty, getting to know your customer, traveling the country for work, and then going to places like India to see factories, and Korea, and getting to know all of this. How did you do the balance, with your family that you had and old friends and stuff? Like, how it just seems so difficult. Like, how did you make it work, or where at sometimes did it not work?
Yeah, well, it's a great question. And I have moved 20 times to one coast and back 20 times, and I have, had 10 positions of either president or CEO, which are all new big families. And I was always first, I tell everybody, one of the biggest important decisions you will make is either, on a spouse or a partner, because, and we had really essentially 4 children, 2 from a prior marriage who came and lived with us, plus our 2 boys. And of course, I always went ahead, typically by 3 months into a new job, and then Barbara was always left with selling the house, transitioning, finding the right school system, etc. And there's no question, I think we were fortunate that everybody took it as an adventure, you know. And I can remember setting my boys down and saying, Dad's got an offer to work a great job in Cincinnati. What do you think? And we would talk the whole thing through. In those days, I learned they want to know, do they have computers there? Do they have electronics? But it was, that was, that was not particularly on my family, but we learned very fast how to settle into a new community, how to meet people, how to adapt and find the best in every community. And, as a result of that, we have the world's richest network, both our children and Barbara and I, of people. We're about to go to a 3-day reunion just of a group from one company, as an example. So.
And were there times where where your professional ambition conflicted with maybe, if you don't mind, what your wife thought, or maybe the kids said, no, we like this school, we like our friends here, we don't want to go to Cincinnati, we don't want to go to LA or wherever it may be. Did you pass up jobs, or was it, well, this is life, guys, kind of hop on board? Like, how did that go?
Yeah, I never remember where we had a definite conflict there. And quite frankly, if there was, I would have turned the job down. And it's like we had lots of other opportunities came along that we kind of sorted out as a family and said, well, do we really want to go and live there? But jointly as a decision, we'd say no. Or is that an interesting industrial, situation? We would kind of, we would jointly make that decision. Also, my wife was an executive recruiter, which was interesting, for one of the big recruiting firms in Connecticut. And then when we did all sorts of interesting things. So when we went to California, they had her set up a high-tech recruiting company in the Silicon Valley, So we found ways to adapt. And also a lot of it was we were able to constantly put the children into great school systems with magnet programs and various stuff. So they quickly adapted through the school environment and friends and whatever. So I think I am very fortunate, very few, but let me mention this. Remember, I was married before when I was 17 years old, okay, and had 2 children. So my wife, who I say put me through Cornell, we were divorced about 6 years later at Carnation. Okay, and that was when I had opportunities then to leave Carnation and go to other companies. And quite frankly, my wife, Gail, said, Frank, I don't want to be the husband of a junior executive. And I used to kid, she could level the cocktail party in about a minute. So, so yes, I went totally through that experience where, with my first wife, where there was a total, there was a total split because of that movement. I want to say, we've had a phenomenal, like her wife and whatever. Our families are totally integrated. We've had a wonderful, relationship throughout my life. But yes, absolutely. I totally faced that.
Yeah, there's, so many decisions to make when you think about growing your personal life and your career that I think everybody goes through that, and it's difficult. It's certainly not easy. And maybe one of the last things I'd like to ask you, Frank, before we go into kind of a quick lightning round, which I'll explain in a moment. But did you, throughout all of these careers, companies, and so forth, did you have any sort of turning point, whether it was professionally or personally, a big choice, a big decision that put you on the fast track, whether it was a first CEO or president job, or leaving a company, joining a company? Was there like one moment where you're like, my gosh, I'm terrified, but was there anything like that in your career, or was it just a gradual progression?
I'd say there are probably 2 things. One was without question, of course, the pump. Okay, the experience with the pump and being fired as the CEO of Mattel. And in my book, I talk about, the failures as well. So I had just developed the pump. We'd had $1 billion year. I just had a new 3-year contract, was given a 3-year contract, and then got terminated. And eventually, with all of the senior professional executives that I brought into the company. Now, that was a turning point.
Reebok.
This is at Reebok. Yeah.
Why were you terminated after the pump was like such a big success?
It's a lot of interesting stories, and it's in the book. But Paul Fireman, who was really the founder, and he did an incredible job in building the company. Had never run a company before, didn't have any professional background, etc. And he had a heart attack, and so one of the reasons the board wanted to bring in somebody with professional management background, and also Paul was at that point spending more time playing golf and in Florida because of his health. Okay, so I can then put in a professional management team, people out of Pepsi and all, leading companies in all these categories, and we develop a pump and a bunch of other products that are wildly successful. Paul comes back into the company and is terrified of the new culture, of the professional management culture. He didn't believe in budgets as an example, and I think he felt he had lost control. And as he said to me when he was terminating, he said, Frank, very few entrepreneurs ever get a second crack at building their company. And, you can read it's public information. He said, Frank did a wonderful job and built a wonderful company, in technology. So there's really interesting, points. So I point that out. So, after that, that did not deter at all, my thought about, risk taking, anything else. If anything, boy, I built a lot of grit. So I'll give that as one point. But I'll give you the other real turning point was when, go ahead, you go ahead.
No, I was hoping you would get to that. I wanted you to share the other one. I think you said was at Mattel.
No, the other one really was at Week, the baking company, when I was fortunate to work for a guy by the name of Bob Kirby, was a Harvard MBA, part of Continental Grain, and we were buying bakeries all across the country, and whole grain bakeries, French bread bakeries, on the leading edge of a whole new trend. And so basically, my deal with Bob was the big jump up for me in my career at that point was, how do I get into general management, start running entire operations and managing P&Ls? So I made a deal basically when I went in. I said, I'll teach you marketing and product development, all of that, if you'll give me a crack at general manager. And that happened. I became the general manager of the operations in Seattle, Washington, which were, very complex bakeries and all of the product development, P&L and whatever. That was a turning point in terms of managing lots of people, complex operations, etc. And that put me on the general management track, which was, allowed me then put me in a different, class. So,
yeah, I would imagine a whole different mindset. This has really been great, Frank. I mean, there's so much we could go over here, which is why I'll turn our listeners certainly to your book, Jump First and Think Fast. But I'd like to finish real quick with what we call the lightning round. I know this is often gets rave reviews from our listeners. Just some questions I can throw at you. You tell us the first thing that comes to mind. Is that okay if we dive into that here to wrap up?
Sure.
Awesome. So the Caderna podcast did begin as a finance show. So I would be remiss if I did not ask these first two questions. What would you say is your best investment you ever made?
Probably marrying my wife, Barbara. So
good answer. Okay. All right, fair
Yeah.
enough. And
Yeah.
on the flip side, can you point to a worst investment that you may have made?
Um, let's see. Probably. Yeah, I did invest in a food company that went down very quickly here in Vermont. So I lost $100,000 in probably 3 or 4 months. So I'd say that probably would qualify. Yeah.
Okay. All right. And kind of in the same vein, do you have any professional regret throughout your career?
Probably the only one is, for the last 7 years of my career, I worked really for Parthenon, which is a very great strategic consulting company that had worked for me, in almost all of my companies. So I joined as a senior VP, and it was great. I did strategy with companies around the world, etc. But when I look back, I probably should have continued to run companies, instead of moving to the consulting side.
Okay. And I assume you're now an author. I assume you're also a reader. Do you have a favorite book?
It's funny. Everyone asks me. I've got most all of the business books. And probably Steve Jobs, and I've got some others. Pink, I really like Pink book, is all about innovation, etc. But you'll see part of the reason that I did my book in a different way is I find that almost all of the business books are all do this, do that. Here are 13 points, follow these, and you're going to be successful, etc. In my case, and from all my experience in mentoring, I found what attracted people to me as a mentor was my very diverse experiences in talking about those, and often my failures, and sometimes in humorous terms. And they pulled from those experiences relevant messages from that. They said, Frank, I always remember the story about, and here's how that impacted my career. So, there is not one business book that I say, gee, this is really, I think, the best business book out there, or that changed my life. So.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. And you're obviously a very busy man. How much do you sleep at night?
Well, first I'd say, my whole pattern would be, I try to be in bed by 11. I would normally get up at 5:30, and I work out 7 days a week. And if there's anything I can say, again, to young people, is physical fitness in terms of starting a day with very positive thinking in the place you get your checklist down is extremely important. And I have never broken that rule for anything. So
I like it. I'm a big believer. And we're wrapping up here. Do you have a favorite quote that you live by?
Yes, my mother's. Never lead a life of quiet desperation.
Never lead a life of quiet desperation. Okay.
And it's for a jump first and fast move.
Got it. Perfect. And then the last two here, you've traveled a ton. I love traveling. Do you have a favorite vacation or destination that you've been to?
Well, that is all. We've been on. We've traveled. Yes, I will. We've been on every continent. And as you know, I'm an avid motorcyclist. So we've motorcycled and my wife, who rides her own bike, we've motorcycled all over the world, and including the U.S. and whatever. So I've seen a lot of the countries, on two wheels. But I'll tell you, my favorite one is a trip to Antarctica. And we were fortunate to go with, I don't know if you know the whole story of the explorer Shackleton, but oh yeah, that's a great story. It's a great leadership story, and I won't go with, Sir Ernest Shackleton. You'll have to, there's a must read on leadership.
Okay, great. Ernest Shackleton.
Anyways, that was an incredible trip, and if you want to also have a first-hand experience with climate change, it's a good place to go.
Okay.
Watch
yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, that's on the list. And then our last question here, Frank. This all started working on a farm in upstate New York, and over 5 decades did some amazing things. So going back to the beginning, who was your hero as a child?
Without question, my mother was absolutely phenomenal. And yeah, there were sports heroes and other things, but what I learned from my mother was just that put me on the track was just incredible. So I learned the jump first, think fast, take risks, from her, and the work hard ethic. Those things stayed with me, throughout my career and were big factors.
That's awesome. Well, Frank, thank you so much for making some time for us today. There's so much more that I could ask you. And like I said, that's why I got to turn everybody to Frank's new book here, Jump First, Think Fast, An Unconventional Approach to High Performance. Frank, thanks again for your time.
Thank you.
Yep. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm your host, Brian Caderna. Thank you for tuning in to another episode. Please be sure to spread the good word, leave a review wherever it is that you're listening. Today, we've had the pleasure of speaking with Frank O'Connell. We'll see you next time.
The Caderna podcast is for informational purposes only. Individual situations may vary, and the information should be relied upon only when coordinated with individual professional advice. Guardian and its subsidiaries do not provide tax, legal, Social Security, student loan, mortgage, or real estate advice. Listeners should contact their own tax, accounting, or legal advisors or the Social Security Department in this matter. All investments and investment strategies contain risk and may lose value. Brian Caderna is a registered representative and financial advisor of Park Avenue Securities, LLC, Pass, 300 Broadacres Drive, Suite 175, Bloomfield, New Jersey, 07003. Securities, product services, and advisory services are offered through Pass, a registered broker-dealer and investment advisor. 973-244-4420. Financial representative, the Guardian Life Insurance Company of America, Guardian, New York, New York. Pass is an indirect, wholly owned subsidiary of Guardian. Caderna Financial Team and International Planning Alliance, LLC, are not affiliates or subsidiaries of Pass or Guardian. Caderna Financial Team is a division of International Planning Alliance, LLC, a general agency of Guardian. Pass is a member of FINRA, SIPC. California Insurance License Number OK04194. Content of the Caderna podcast is copyright of Brian M. Caderna, all rights reserved. Any redistribution or reproduction of part or all of the content in any form is prohibited without prior permission from the Caderna podcast. The views and opinions expressed herein may not be those of Guardian Life Insurance Company of America, Guardian, or any of its subsidiaries or affiliates. Guardian does not verify and does not guarantee the accuracy or completeness of the information or opinions presented herein. Any third-party materials referenced cannot be endorsed or verified by Guardian and are used as the opinion of the author. Guardian, its subsidiaries, or affiliates do not provide or issue or advise for mortgages. This material contains the current opinions of the author, but not necessarily those of Guardian or its subsidiaries, and such opinions are subject to change without notice.